Welcome to BeMoreNews.com, the news before the news, where we uncover the truth.
An accent. We need God. Because only God can bring us out of this mess.
I may not look like you and you me, but that's the way it's supposed to be. Dare to be you, dare to be me, and dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting its glory shine through. Dare to be you, dare to be me, and dare to be, and dare to be.
Good morning. Welcome to the show. My name's Donnie Glover. We've been dealing with a new computer this week, so we're adjusting. So thank you for your patience. Everything will be back in stride come Monday morning. Nonetheless, we've had a busy week. A lot has been happening, not just here in the DMV, but also nationally. And today's guest is going to help us to unpack some of this stuff, as I'm sure you have heard over the past 2 or 3 years through the pandemic. Our mental health is everything. And we have been disaffected by everything from misinformation to mass shootings. Well, without further ado, we'll just get to our guest, Dr. Gail Christopher. You got to unmute yourself there, Doc. Hit that button, unmute that mic there, man.
There we go. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Christopher. Are you a morning person?
I am. Yes, I am, Donnie.
Well, I'm going to need you to lead this show because I'm more of a midnight owl person. Praise the Lord.
All right.
Are you a believer?
Absolutely, I am. That's how we've always made it through all these troubling times.
You know, our people have been through something in this country. I mentioned misinformation. A lot of us, we don't know who we are. I wrote a book, Dr. Christopher, my second book actually, I Am Black Wall Street, and I look at the history of the people who went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, the first group of Black people, and they included Black Indians. And what I'm getting to is a lot of us, the melanated ones, we only know what we have been told by others. Now, if some people were in a war and one group won and the other lost, the people who won get to tell their whole story, because that's who tells history, the victors. But what about us? A lot of us have indigenous roots. I've been on Ancestry.com this week.
Mm-hmm.
And I know my great-grandmother had Blackfoot Indian in her. But if I look in the history books, you're either Black or you're not. But my research shows me that there are many of us with indigenous roots. But because that story is not told and it's not popular and it's not on television and Instagram, we deny that, or we just don't know. But I digress. Top of the morning to you. The floor is yours.
Top of the morning to you too as well. And I love that you started with history and you started with the misinformation conundrum that we faced. You know, I recommend, if you have the stomach for it, I just listened to a wonderful collection, 18 compelling narratives from people who were formerly enslaved, right? So these were the authentic voices of our ancestors, many of us. And it's so enlightening to understand what they endured and what they survived and what they overcame. And, you know, we have got to take pride in what we have brought to this country and the reality that this country exists because of our unpaid labor, right? Because of, and I'm not talking a few years or a few decades, this is centuries. And so understanding who we are and understanding how that experience shaped the lack of a moral ethos in this country today. Our obsession with guns and violence is directly related to the history of 2+ centuries of enslavement of African Americans. And in order to enslave and oppress a people, in order to destroy the indigenous cultures and take their land, this required violence, and this required all manner of enforcement of that violence. And so that became sort of the culture, character of this country. We're not going to shift that. We're not going to move to a land that loves and reveres peace until we face that truth. And that's one of the reasons why I spent the most of my career designing and supporting in ways that I could when I was within philanthropy, uh, a truth process for this country. This country's never done it, although over 44 other countries in the world have faced their truth of their past, and they have attempted to reconcile that, to heal from that, and to transform themselves and become a much more just environment for all people. We haven't really done that as a country. And so we now have what we call truth, racial healing, and transformation, or TRHT, and many communities, many college campuses, there is a movement in this country for us to do that. We're experiencing resistance and backlash, but it is past time for our country to face its truth, its real truth, which is how much we need and depend upon one another.
I have so many questions for you, but as you were talking, I'm going to try to go back through my brain. As you were talking, the thought came to me that I've known you for several lifetimes. But let me
All right.
tell you why. The last time I spoke with someone like you, you bring to mind Dr. Patricia Newton. Did you happen to know her?
The name sounds familiar, but it seems like it was a long time ago.
She was very close friends with Dr. Francis Cress Welsing.
Oh, yes. Now, Dr. Wilson, yes. Okay.
And both of them talked a lot about post-traumatic slavery disorder.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
Uh, but something else you alluded to, the truth and reconciliation. We saw it happen in South Africa. We've seen the Japanese get restitution. We've seen the Asiatic Native Americans get restitution. But something else came to mind as you were talking. $5 Indians. I was trying to explain to someone earlier this week, and I go a little into my book, how the people who were here when the Europeans arrived, these people had to essentially go through an ID check to prove that they were Indian. And if it wasn't proven to the liking of and the name escapes me, they did it out in Oklahoma, where they said that
Mm,
you are black and you are Indian. You are black, you're Indian.
yeah.
And it's all based on how you look. And as we know, indigenous people's hair can be coarse, it can be straight, it can be brown, it can be black, it can be light. The audacity of America to say what you are.
Yeah. Well, there's in my work, and my recent book just came out. It's called Prescription, or RX Racial Healing. And it's really just a handbook to help communities work together to overcome this fallacy. And that's what I call it, a fallacy, a false ideology of a hierarchy of human value, that somehow your worth as a human being can be determined by your physical characteristics. And what you're describing there is the embodiment of that, right? And it is the fallacy. It's sort of like the core architecture of this nation, that who you are as a human being, your worth, your value, your opportunity, and ultimately your health and your life and death trajectory is driven by your physical characteristics. When you say it out loud, it's absurd, but yet it still drives this country. And we have to eliminate the permission for that to continue to be the case. Now, in our work, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, we don't say truth and reconciliation. We say transformation, because if we studied all the different TRCs that happened in the world, and we recognize that in this country, where you're looking at 4 consecutive centuries of adhering to a false belief and then designing systems to reinforce that belief, it wasn't about going back to some fantasy beginnings. It is about transforming, but it's also about coming together across this nation, across races, across politics, across religions, to build up the critical relationships and the critical mass to sustain the change. And it's hard work.
Doc,
Yep. Go ahead.
Doc, as you're talking, so many thoughts. Here's another thought. As you were just speaking, our self-included, I'm guilty. We love rap music, but one of the core words in the vocabulary of rap music is the N word. I am guilty. I am guilty. From the last poets to Jay-Z, I am guilty. Gil Scott, I am guilty. Help me to unpack the N word, whether it's Nigga, Nigger. I have to hear from you, Elder.
We have a way of taking those labels and internalizing them. It reminds me, and this is gonna seem a little contradictory, but it reminds me of when we were enslaved, we only got what was left over, the right down to chitlins. You know what I'm saying? We only got what was
rooted to the tutor.
You know what I'm saying? And we found a way to turn that around and make it a positive for us, right? So to excuse this internalization of this negative derogatory term and us turning it around and using it, I think it comes from that survival mechanism. I think it's wrong, and I think we need to not do that. But, we have to have grace and understanding of each other and understand that's why it may be done. But it's just like today, Donnie, so many Black people, you hear them saying the word white supremacy, right? And it rolls off their tongue like, now we have permission to call it out. But every time we say it, we give it power.
We give it, Yes,
I
refuse to say it. I refuse to say I'm a minority, Dr. Christopher.
Thank you.
I know I'm not a minority.
Absolutely. And we are the majority of the world's population, right? And so we are the Alpha and the Omega, in the sense that the origin of mankind is African, right? We all trace our ancestry back to Africa. Why do we want to participate in the denial of our core humanity? Why do we want to take their language and have it come out of our mouths in a derogatory way? So whenever I say to my young advocate friends, say, look, if you must use that word that they created and took on as their identity, at least say it's a lie every time you use it. But frankly, I think we should stop using it. It is not a truth. There is nothing supreme or superior in the shooting and killing of innocent people, the enslaving of innocent people, the brutalization, the barbaric behavior. It's not superior, it's depraved, And so I just that is, if we don't accomplish anything else today, if I could get people to stop using and repeating that lie, I think we will have accomplished something.
Because Doc, and I go briefly into it, I'm not the core scientist that you are, but when I think of the origins of man in Southern Africa, with the San Bushmen have the oldest DNA And of course, that's deoxyribonucleic acid, the DNA. We have the oldest DNA on earth, going to Southern Africa. But as man and woman walked and traveled first to Asia and then to Europe, I am reminded that if there is anyone, and I dare use the word superior, wouldn't it be the parent? If I am a derivative of the oldest, and so what I see in today's society is the youngest species of humanity telling the oldest species of humanity right from wrong. And that's like my child telling me that they are smarter than me.
You know, I in my book I have this chapter which I call 4 decades in the making, which describes my journey to develop my approaches to this. But I wish I had entitled it, and in the next edition I will, catching up with the ancestors. You know, the ancestral wisdom of indigenous people the world over. You know, we're just in the West, you know, we're just beginning to open our minds and our hearts to understanding and valuing the wisdom of our indigenous ancestors the world over. Now there is a tendency for us as Black people not to understand that our ancestors are indigenous as well, you know, but they're indigenous to Africa. You know, so sometimes I encounter descendants of Native Americans, descendants of immigrant groups, to say that, you know, ours are the indigenous ancestors, and I have to remind them all of our ancestors were indigenous at some point in time. And the ways that they lived in harmony with nature, the ways that they understood their interdependence and their interconnection as human beings, you know, as human families, as cultures, these were the wise ways. This is the wisdom. And, you know, in our meteoric rise in this country on the backs of enslaved and indigenous people, we began to think that, you know, we could only value money, we could only value certain types of knowledge. But we're in the 21st century now, and it's time for us to catch up with ourselves and learn to value those things that are permanent, like the environment, you know, like love, like relationships, like the sacred gift of parenting.
Doc, you know, going back to allowing our children to tell us what to do, and I don't mean to get too graphic, but when I look at the curriculum being pushed on our 5-year-olds about sexuality before the conversation even happens in the household, we live in a country that's so caught up on telling us how to raise our children. And again, we forget the history, how Black people raised white people's children, even down to our grandmothers and great grandmothers and great grandmothers breastfeeding their babies. Yet our ancestors could not drink from their water fountain. Can you please explain to me what sickness of man thinks that you can do that to people without any repercussions? Okay, bump the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, bump the reparations. What about karma? And I even think in this weather we're having, when I think about hurricanes, I've read those memes that come across. It said it's the ancestors coming across the waters with these hurricanes in the Midwest when not one Black person gets hit. I know that's a stretch, though.
You say a lot, Donnie. I have been a proponent all of my career as a holistic uh, healthcare provider for the importance of breastfeeding, and I remind Black women in our history that our ancestors, our maternal ancestors, you know, they actually functioned as what they call wet nurses. You know what I mean? They did nurse white babies, and in fact, I don't even want to open that can in terms of the sexual abuse of Black women, during the enslavement era. That's just the whole show in itself. But
Oh, you talking about Dr. J. Marion Sims, the father of gynecology and all of the racist things he did to Black women without the use of anesthesiology? Yeah, put him on blast.
yeah, that is one aspect of it. But when slavery, intercontinental transatlantic slavery was banned, the only way that the Southern plantation owners could increase their slaves was to rape and impregnate the female Black slaves so that they could, and remember the law was passed in Virginia that said any descendant of an enslaved woman was in fact born a slave, so they may have been impregnated by the slave owners, but they were building up. They could buy one or two slaves, and then they could build a whole plantation on the. It's horrible in terms of the truth of the violation of our women. Now that's just that. Then you add to that the creation of the practice of gynecology through experimentation on the bodies of our maternal ancestors. It's hard to tell these stories and not become so angry that we become incapacitated. I have had to
That's how I
develop.
felt when I watched Rosewood.
Yes, 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 Rosewood, or even when you really understand what happened in Tulsa. But that is history. Our job is to face the truth of that history and to acknowledge the ignorance from whence it came. There was just pure ignorance. And honestly, even if you read the literature of the Confederate generals, they 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 truly believed in their hearts that Black people were other than human and treated us accordingly. And this belief system, has
Then why were
it,
they raping our women?
I
If we are why are they raping our women?
I hear you.
And what's
I
that
hear you.
make them?
Total contradictions. You're absolutely right. But this today, this is now. Our power is in this moment. Our power is always in this moment. And that power, from my belief, that power comes from a divine source, and no one can give it to me and no one can take it away. I was born with it. And that's the message I try to convey to my brothers and sisters. We have the power to transform this country, but we must do it through the vehicles that we have. So there's no such thing as not voting. Do you know what I mean? There's no such thing as not being registered to vote if we live in a democratic government. And so we have to exercise en masse, you know, all the power that we have to move our country forward.
So, Dr. Christopher, this is going to be an interview you will not forget. You know why? Because I'm going to ask you a question that I imagine only one or two other people have even thought to ask you. But we're unpacking today. We've already unpacked the N word. Now, are you ready? Are you ready? I got a curveball coming at you. Are you ready? It's baseball
Well,
season.
okay. Go ahead,
It
Doc.
is my understanding that the etymology of the word MF goes to the plantation.
Well, there is a lot of crass brutality and almost insane mythology around sexuality that is associated with those centuries of enslavement. So you're right. No one would ever ask me that question but you, Donnie. But but there are books. Ida B. Wells, the famous journalist who really started the fight to make lynching a federal crime, right? Amazing Black journalist. She documented the sexual perversion, if you will, and in fact, Frederick Douglass even commented um, her writings at one point. I have to make sure I got my chronology right there, uh, but so there was a lot that was going on there that was obscene and unacceptable, and we never talk about it. It's just like it never happened, but it did happen, And that is part of what has to be unearthed in the truth telling.
Have you come across, well, I'm sure you have, what happened in North Carolina with the mass sterilization of
Yeah.
Black women? Or here in
California.
Baltimore?
Yeah, California, North Carolina, even up in New York State. I mean, this permission to sterilize, to and all, most of which was some of it was to prevent. It was during the eugenics era. To prevent the just like this great replacement mythology right now. Fear has driven all kinds of corrosive and destructive efforts to maintain the fallacy of a hierarchy of human value. And it's happened around the country. And women
Are
are,
are
are,
you
are
suggesting
often,
that are you suggesting abortion rights has nothing to do with Black women, that abortion rights has all to do with preserving white babies?
I'm not suggesting that. I think that's an oversimplification. I believe that the decision to be a parent, to carry a baby and to deliver a baby and to spend your life dedicated to the raising of that baby, I think that is a decision that all women have the right to make, period.
But you alluded to eugenics, and that takes me to Margaret Sanger and Charles Galton, the cousin of Charles
Yeah.
Darwin. He
Yep.
came out of her mouth and said that Black people are like weeds that need to be experimented. But she was so
Yep.
diabolical, she was able to trick Black leaders, some of my favorite Black leaders. She did a 3-card Molly on them. And I'm talking about Du Bois, Dr. King. This woman was relentless.
Yes, and she operated in an era where the dominant ideology of a hierarchy of humanity, and with us at the bottom and less than the bottom, that was the dominant way of thinking. And it carried over into, persons with disabilities. This eugenics movement was almost every person of stature. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but many of the leaders of stature in the white world, they were part of that movement, and some of their descendants are still very active across the globe in terms of in the healthcare and other and related industries. So that's a reality. I'm not denying it. But when it comes to everyday life for women in this country today, I'm an old-fashioned womanist, not a feminist, but a womanist. And I believe that I have the right as a woman to determine and to decide whether I'm going to be pregnant or not.
When
And
young African American women hear you say that you are a womanist, what piece of history must they understand? I mean, without a lot of research, it's easy to come on the scene and say that I'm a feminist. Are you suggesting that, similar to the LGBTQ efforts, that Black people are used until the protest is over and then we go back to business as usual?
well, I see. I'm not gonna diminish Black people in any way if I can help it in this conversation. I am going to say that the movement of feminism all the way back to women's suffrage denied the equal rights of Black women. Now that's a truth.
So
That
white
era.
women were denied and Black people were denied. And the
Yep.
last I checked, white women only got the right to vote. Hey, all of this was happening in the same era,
Yep.
but yet, with all due respect, Karen is calling the police on my brother out in Central Park for watching birds and
Yes, I
thinks she's
know.
actually white.
Well, and that's a whole nother conversation. But that goes back to the fact that we never did the hard work. And let me make sure I communicate at least the approach that I think is comprehensive enough to get us where we need to be. We never dealt with the fallacy of the belief system. And our beliefs become our reality. So we have to completely eradicate any permission to believe that there's some sort of hierarchy of humanity based on physical characteristics. And that's narrative change, right? That's telling the true stories like you're doing now, like we're doing. But it's also not letting social media perpetuate these lies. It's not letting these various television channels perpetuate these lies. We have to somehow get a grip on the collective story that we're being bombarded with. So that's a part of our work to overcome racism. And then we have to build authentic relationships across racial lines that will, you've seen couples, I'm sure, you've seen dynamics all across this country where when you really get to know somebody, you begin to see that all these myths that you've held on to, they're not really true. And so the science is clear that the best way to debias and to also build solidarity is in through authentic relationships. So that's the second part of this framework for the work. And that gives you a broader community, a bigger mass of people who prioritize the work of ending racism. But then you have to tackle the structural legacy of that false belief. And we have three basic ways of looking at that. First is by dealing with the consequences of enforced separation, redlining, segregation, cradle to prison pipeline, all kind child welfare system. These notions of racial hierarchy have translated into systems of separation and segregation. And then we have a legal system that was designed to reinforce this fallacy of a hierarchy of human value. In every legal system, from governance to public policy to immigration to voting to access to voting. So that's another area in terms of the law, is another pillar of this 5-part framework. And then ultimately, it's an economic system. Slavery and its consequences of devaluing our humanity, it was designed for profit, period. You know what I mean? And economic exploitation. So those are the 5 pillars of this process, TRHT, truth, racial healing, and transformation. And it takes us beyond, reconciliation. It takes us to transformation. And that to me is the most important work that our country needs to be doing right now. And in that is include reparations. That economic piece includes reparations. But if we do reparations and we don't do the transformation, we don't do the systems change, we don't do the justice work, and most importantly, eradicating the belief systems, if we don't do the narrative work, then reparations will only benefit a few and they won't benefit future generations.
Dr. Christopher, before I ask my next question, the answer already came to me. I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to pose it anyway. So one of the people I talk about in this book is a white man. There's 2 heroes. One's a black Indian named Chief John Horse, and the other one is a white man. And this white man helped with the establishment of Oklahoma. His name was Captain John Brown. So my question was going to be, can white males participate in this healing process? And then the answer came to me, if they like John Brown, they can. Otherwise, they got to sit over in the corner in time out and face the wall.
Well, Donnie, I go back to the reality, the numeric reality, that Black people are not the majority population in this country today. And
That's what
so
they say. But every time I look, the census say we miscounted. I no longer believe we 13%. I say we 20%.
Well, but that's not 80, that's not 100%. And so as long as we live in a democracy, in a multiracial society, we have to engage everybody that we can, because the notion of racial hierarchy is a lie. And if COVID-19 didn't show us anything, it should have shown us how much our lives are interdependent and interconnected. And so, yes, by all means, we have
That
to
sounds
engage white
good,
people.
but some people it's like some people are just like the scorpion crossing the river. It's a scorpion. And I ain't giving no scorpion no ride across the river so they can sting me. No, 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 I don't know. Not me. You can give him a ride, but I'm gonna be watching him the whole time.
Now you sound
How
like
can
my
we
mother.
trust? How can we trust people who have consistently betrayed trust?
Well, I'm not going to simplify that and pretend like it's not a challenge. It is. But you started this program by asking me, was I a believer? And I want us, as we, move toward our closure, I want to remind us that the divine is what we trust, right? And the divine, the pure grace and love, the gift of our life, it lives in all of us regardless of our physical packaging, so if I do my work and I move from a place of grace, if I do my meditation and I do my prayer and I lead with love, that's what's going to draw into my sphere. So I don't have to trust the person, but I can trust that divine that operates in that person.
Okay, well, Doc, I ain't gonna let you off the hook. I may have you for a few more minutes, but while I have you, I'm going to give you the toughest questions I've ever thought to ponder in the universe. Clearly, I've
All
spent a
right.
lot of time to myself, and I got a lot of thoughts. Okay, so Miss Truth and Reconciliation, Dr. Christopher, um,
Healing and
what about, huh?
go ahead.
Okay, well, religion. Religion has us messed up. Now, I'm a
That's
student,
true.
and I know that the Ethiopian bishops went to the first Christian conference, that old Baptist convention. This was 325 AD. The Ethiopians, the people from the east, Somalia, they went to the first Nicene Council, Nicean, and they never went back. They never went back. Secondly, and that was the first country I visited in Africa, Ethiopia. When I get there, I see, well, I didn't get to see Lalibela. I was actually there in the middle of Temket, but I've learned that Ethiopia has the oldest known Bible to man.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the book
Mm-hmm.
says, study to show yourself approved, and I have yet to meet an African American who speaks Aramaic. And so
Mm-hmm.
what I'm getting to is, when are we going to get serious about Christianity, about our own Christianity? Because so much of what we think, know, and believe, I don't know that we went home and did our homework.
No, I agree with you
Because if we,
100% on.
okay,
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
well,
I
church
agree.
got us messed up. When I
Well,
look up
church,
on the wall and I see Jesus with blue eyes and straight hair,
yeah.
and I've been to the Middle East, you can't have no blue eyes and straight hair there for no thousands of years. That don't happen, cuz.
No,
I've
it's
been to
not
a
true.
Palestinian refugee camp,
Yep.
and those
Yep.
people are like the black people of the Middle East.
Yep.
They fight tanks
Yep.
with rocks
Yep.
because somebody has invaded their land and told them that they don't belong there. And honestly, I got to tell you, of all the places I've been, I felt more at home in the Middle East than anywhere I've ever been. I felt like, wow, y'all here. This is my land. That's how I
Mm.
felt.
Well, I will say this, and history is certainly supports that. Uh, Religion in this country, particularly Christianity, was used to reinforce the lie of enslavement, in terms of the right of whites to enslave blacks. Christianity has been exploited and misused as a tool of oppression. And we don't do our research. We don't dig into the history and understand that the wisdom that was embodied in the true message of what is called Jesus the Christ. I agree. He couldn't have been blonde haired and blue eyed. Absolutely. But again, it shows how a narrative can be used to perpetuate a hierarchy and to perpetuate a lie. And the religious movements in this country, particularly the Southern Baptists and others, they've been primary in espousing and reinforcing this ideology of a hierarchy of humanity and a hierarchy of divinity that excludes us because of pigmentation. So you're absolutely right. We have to wake up. I'm a very spiritual person. You didn't hear me say I was a religious person. I'm a believer in the divine, but I understand that there are many interpretations. I believe there's wisdom in the words of Jesus Christ. I believe there's wisdom in the words of many of the prophets of Muhammad. And I believe we all have access to that wisdom through our ancestors. So you are
Yeah.
100% correct when you talk about the fact that religion has been used to and been misused, particularly to exploit women and women of color.
So since we debunking myths, I need you to do a Herculean task. I'll steal that back from the Greeks. Okay, Santa Claus. I know you
Oh,
wasn't
stop.
ready for this interview, but I got to ask you about Santa Claus because my faith in Santa Claus has been restored when I found out that Santa Claus was a black man from Turkey. He was a black, and then and the person who told me that said, "Have you ever known white people to give away anything?" So that's what I want to ask you.
Well, I'm gonna let you have that one. I do know that the idea of generosity and grace and celebrating at that time of year, all of those mythologies were rooted in indigenous cultures and indigenous beliefs and understandings. I'll be honest with you, Donnie, I hadn't heard about this Black Santa. It doesn't surprise
I
me.
want I want you to look up Santa Claus. His name was Saint Nicholas. He was a black man from Turkey, and
All
so
right.
I think it's time that they change all of the Christmas decorations and put that melanin back in Santa. Okay, so every we I had to loosen you up a little bit. We're onto this school. We're onto the school shooting thing.
Yeah.
I imagine it touched your heart. You wrote about it recently. You want to share with us?
I actually wrote about the Buffalo shooting, in terms of the my people being gunned down and massacred in Buffalo. And I did tweet about this shooting in. I haven't written a piece yet about this shooting out there in Texas. But this notion that we have a thing in our vocabulary, gunmen, right? The gunman, right? I mean, think about that for a minute. Why does that even exist, right? Why do we have a description of manhood associated with guns, right? The gun man, right? The gun show, the gun. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. Guns are only designed to kill and maim, period. That's their purpose. We can dress it up and talk about it's a defense, but it's a defense against what, right? It's a defense against our projected fear and our projected ideology and belief, in terms of other people. So the fact that this country is so obsessed with guns, and that we are obsessed enough to allow our progeny, our children, to be vulnerable. This is just beyond belief. It's beyond the pale. As President Biden said, why do we allow this carnage, right? You have to ask yourself, who is the we here? We have right now a Congress that is not representative of the majority of the country. So when you say, why do we allow this carnage? When you ask that question, it's not we, it's not us. It is a minority of folks who are in a position of power in Congress who simply block intelligent action to protect the people. It's just unbelievable.
Multimillionaires, by the way,
Oh yeah,
multimillionaires.
who trace their wealth, the majority of them, back to the legacy of enslavement. That's another discussion. But definitely, know, we as a country, and particularly any audience I speak to, we have to recognize that our true power in a democracy is our vote and our willingness to mobilize and stand up and put people in office who can have the capacity to take action on behalf of our society. We cannot allow 18-year-olds to buy military style weapons, period. That just can't continue to be an option. And that's not a big deal.
Doc,
That's a simple
I'm
change.
waiting on you to say it. We reap what we sow. That's the karma. We we play with guns, crack, dope, fentanyl. We play with death. We put it around our children. We put it in the cereal. And then, oh, wow, Maisha has shot up 30 people. Oh, she needs therapy. We feed off of violence. We love violence.
Well, because we were conceived in violence and dedicated to the proposition that some people's lives matter and others don't. There is no question we are entertained by violence in this country. To me, that is the ultimate absurdity, that so much of our entertainment from the beginning of the entertainment industry was grounded in violence. If you look at video games today, the sort of pilot sphere where they were developed was in the military. And that ethos of violence began to define the video game industry today. And so these kids are being mentally programmed that violence is a way of life. So some of us who know better have to do everything we can to put a stop to this. But you're absolutely right. It is showing up in our lives because it has become part of the heart and soul of our culture.
Dr. Christopher, Ukraine was invaded by Russia. American media taught us to be real empathetic to the Ukrainians, that
Yes.
Russia was being bad, as if the United States didn't do the same thing. But Ukraine. I saw African Americans changing their profile picture. We support Ukraine. But then, Dr. Christopher, I learned that they wouldn't let Black people flee the war zone in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to understand what manner of stupid does that. Make your
Well,
mind up. Not
honestly, Don,
you, but
I go back to the same premise. This deeply seated belief. You know how so much of the world believes in God. I would say just that much of the world believes in the fallacy of a hierarchy of humanity. And as long as they really do believe that in their heart, yeah, they're going to deny entry to Black people because they don't want Black people there, because they believe that Black people are somehow less than. Racism is a solidly
how am I
entrenched
less than
ideology.
Doc? I was in a different part of Baltimore Lake that I normally don't go to. Nonetheless, I saw with my own eyes, because I live in Baltimore, I saw a tanning salon. I saw a tanning salon. I saw people who were trying to get this skin. I saw it
Oh,
with my own eyes. I couldn't believe it. Wow. Why would you want to look like me, but you want to kill me? I mean, what manner of psychosis is that?
well, it is definitely not a mental health state. I'll leave it at that. The contradictions are endless. But ultimately, if we're going to survive and we're going to have a viable democracy, we got to put those childish things behind us. And we've somehow got to find our way to the humanity and to the spark of the divine that lives in each of us, regardless of our packaging, if you will. my pigmentation or the lack of someone else's, it's a function of our ancestors' adaptation to the environments in which they evolve. Nature knows what we need. If it's we're in a sunny climate, we need more pigmentation. If we're in a dry place, we need a different type of nose structure or a different type of hair. All of these physical, superficial dynamics, they are evolution in response to the environments in which our ancestors evolved. But internally, we are more than 99% the same. We're 99.9% the same. And so these old childish ways of thinking that equate value and worth and extreme difference, we have to put those behind us. We have to celebrate the nuanced differences that we have in terms of culture and knowledge and as we talked about, indigenous wisdoms, etc. But we can't continue to divide ourselves and survive as a democracy.
Doc, I know our time is running out. I'm a big fan of futuristic movies. I remember when LeVar Burton got the fancy glasses on Star Trek, and of course, that was different because nobody ran the ship like other than Captain Kirk. Okay, so we're now in a futuristic world. Elon Musk plans on fixing up a subway system that we can get to the moon and back. Okay, I want to know, is there going to be racism on these other planets?
I hope not. I think it's a uniquely, shall we say, Earth thing. I'm a fan. I love science fiction, and I certainly, was a fan of Star Trek. So, even with its limitations, it was revolutionary at the time. And my belief is that we have to jettison those things that no longer serve us. And the fallacy of a hierarchy of human value. When Star Trek jettisoned something, it was gone, with the exception of Spock, of course. He was jettisoned and he was given a second life. But let us hope that we can certainly jettison this permission to devalue human beings and replace it with a heartfelt capacity to love and value, and certainly love and value our children. They deserve so much more from us.
Doc, we're going into the Memorial Day weekend. Any thoughts about those who gave some and those who gave all? And as I talk to you, I think of our ancestors who fought in every major war in this country, going back to the Revolutionary War. And if anybody doesn't believe me, you need to look up James Forten in Philadelphia. He was a free Black man, pretty much a millionaire and a patriot among patriots.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't know this, but it was our ancestors who literally won the Civil War, right? And so, at my house, I have a picture of my father right by the door. He's deceased now, but he's in his military uniform, and from when he was in Europe during World War II. So, on this weekend, I always pay homage to him and to all of our ancestors and to our young men and the prime of their lives, who laid down their lives so that we could have the possibility of a government ruled by the people, all of the people. And so this is a sacred holiday weekend, and we need to revere and respect the sacrifices that have been made. But I feel the best way to respect those sacrifices is to live up to the promise, to actualize the potential of democracy, in which we are all created equal and endowed by our Creator with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Dr. Gail Christopher, I'm going to commission you to have a conversation with the 10 most influential rappers in America. And I think Kendrick Lamar certainly would be on that list. If you had the most influential rappers in the world sitting in your office, in your classroom right now, what would you implore to them? I mean, we remember C. Dolores Tucker tried it her way.
Yes,
What
my
would you tell
sister.
them?
I'd start by telling them that I love them You know, I would start by saying that you remind me of my son, and that, my first obligation as a Black woman, as a Black mother of a son and a daughter, but particularly of a son, is to extend my love to you as a human being. And then I would say, I hope that you will love yourselves. Love yourselves more than this society loves you. Love yourselves more than you've been permitted to do so, and that you would become a messenger, that you would carry the message that we deserve so much more, that we deserve total equity in terms of opportunity, and that you would use your wealth, your resources that you may have accumulated in the industry, that you would use it to make sure that all of our children, particularly our Black and brown children, have the opportunities that you had to experience and optimize their potential. We need to jettison any derogatory references to ourselves, our women, our culture, our children. We can't let the labels that they created come out of our mouths, right? And we have to understand that violence is not the way forward. It is someone else's way, but it's not our way. And then that would be my message.
Any advice to young parents? I'm a granddad now. I have one son, one daughter, but now one grandson, one granddaughter. And I like grandparenthood a whole lot more than parenthood. But any advice to our parents?
Well, now, they say there's a special gene that we have that turns on when we become grandparents. It's a different kind of love. I'm a grandparent too, and I got to tell you, the joy of being with my grandson, it's unmatched. I love my kids, but my grandson, it's a whole different experience. I love him so much. My advice
I
to
shouldn't feel
parents is
guilty.
no, you should be happy in that gift of being a grandparent. But I would say to parents, as I said to parents in the first book I wrote, which was called Anchors for the Innocent, that your love of yourself, your care of yourself as a parent, does more to teach your child than anything else. You have got to model. Parents, children don't listen to what we say, they watch what we do. And if you've been a parent, you see your child grows up and you say, my goodness, they are so much like their parents, right? Because they're internalizing our actions. The other thing, I think we have to give our children absolute love. We have to give them the esteem that society doesn't give them. We have to make sure they understand that they are all that, right? That they are the bee's knees, that we love them unconditionally. And if we imbue them with that deep self-esteem, they carry that into the world. You've given me an opportunity, so I'm just going to mention both my children. My son is a dancer, a hip hop dancer and choreographer. My daughter is a best-selling author. Her name is Heather McGee, and her best-selling book is The Sum of Us: What Racism Cost Us All and How We Can Prosper Together. So I feel like I've lived this advice, and it shows up in my children today.
Good deal. Dr. Gail Christopher, how can people get in touch with you?
I can be reached. I'm executive director of the National Collaborative for Health Equity. So you can reach me at our website, nationalcollaborative.org. And I also have a website, Dr. Gail C. Christopher, and I certainly encourage you to visit that website and sign up for any of our classes that we're going to be giving at the Intianu Center for Healing in Nature. That's my center here in Maryland.
Where's your center?
I'm sorry?
Where's your center?
My center is here in Fort Washington, Maryland.
Oh, you in gorgeous Prince George's County.
I am, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I love Prince George's. Dr.
Yeah,
Christopher, thank you for joining us, and thank you to
it's
your team.
thank you. It's been my pleasure. It's really been an intriguing conversation. So much.
Don't forget me. Stay tuned for Mr. William Hanna Blue at 10 a.m. Good morning, world. Thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.